Today we're going to be looking at the Transcendentals, truth, goodness, and beauty, and what exactly is it that they transcend? Our big goal is happiness in this life and heaven in the next. To achieve this, we need to stay close to God throughout each day. But how do we do that while living in the real world with all of its challenges and distractions? Growing our interior life through Christian mental prayer is the answer. This podcast mines the riches of the greatest spiritual tradition on earth so we can grow in holiness together. I'm Steve Smith. Thank you for joining me for Pearls of the Interior Life. Welcome to this episode of Pearls of the Interior Life. Thank you as always for making this time for the Lord. I'm glad to be here with you back from vacation, back from the beach, and soon our daughter is going to be starting up at Franciscan. I have my official Franciscan regalia on. Okay, today, last week we were looking at beauty. Beauty is one of the Transcendentals, a very powerful one. And that brings us into this week. I was just stepping back. The Transcendentals is one of those things, at least for me, that I hear about often, kind of a vague, watery idea of where they fit in to things, but good to step back and see what really is the power of them. Where do they fit in to our Catholic world view? For starters, transcendental, it comes from the word transcend. That comes from the Latin word transcendentum, which means rising above, or to go beyond, to push beyond our human limits. And that's sort of half right. It's half right. It's kind of an inverse of really the point of the Transcendentals, because the point is we can aspire to something greater than our limits, to rising above, because there is something greater. If there wasn't something greater up there to begin with, well, then what would be the point? So the three Transcendentals are truth, goodness, and beauty. Now, we can aspire to perfect goodness because perfect goodness itself created us to be good. We can aspire to perfect truth because perfect truth itself became incarnate and lived among us and revealed itself to us. We can aspire to perfect beauty because perfect beauty itself radiates down upon us. Again, everything comes from above. And that's why we can aspire to that. We can desire to rise up to that, to meet it. It's kind of like the trickle-down theory of divinity, I suppose. Now, as believers, we recognize two key aspects of the transcendent: that it points to God, who is infinitely beyond us, that because of our spiritual soul and God's grace, we can still attain to God. Whenever we experience consolation, whenever we see the working of providence, whenever we see Christ in others, whenever we give without counting the cost, what do? We're transcending the physical world. We're rising above. Remember that definition of rise above. We're rising above our fallen nature. We're rising above just the limitations of the world, of time, of schedule, of every bit of that. All of those natural constraints, we're rising above them by God's supernatural grace. That's what we recognize with eyes of faith. We recognize the transcendent is always available to us. If only we open ourselves up to it. God is always there, revealing himself through creation. Okay, but everyone, though, believers and non-believers alike, can also get a sense of the transcendent just in the ordinary working of things from our own human experience. And this is where the Transcendentals come in, through truth, goodness, and beauty, just by our own ability of reason and observation. through those transcendentals, we can come to that recognition that there has to be something greater. And in fact, that something greater is always crashing into creation, always trying to reveal itself through truth, goodness, and beauty. Why? Why is that? Why do they point to something greater? Because in those three in particular, and we'll get to that in a moment, those three in particular, you always have that sense that there must be something greater, that there's always a greater truth, always a greater goodness, always a greater beauty. Take beauty, let's look at that, because we were looking at this last week. We always have the sense, no matter how beautiful a painting may be or an image, at some point, what happens? We tire of it. We even get to the point where we start recognizing imperfections in it, and we long for something more. Even if we go out in nature and we take in some magnificent vista, well, after a certain amount of time, we're ready to move on to the next one, right? We're not sated. We're always looking for that greater beauty. We have that capacity in us to always be taking more, recognizing that there's something more. Well, where does that come from? And what are we measuring it against? Ultimately, there must be a greater beauty, a higher standard, something beyond our capacity, because we're always reaching and attaining for more. So it is also with truth. So it is also with goodness. Now, why those three? Well, that goes back to the beginning of Western thought, Western philosophy, especially with Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Each of them had some conception of truth, goodness, and beauty, and that it revealed something greater, something like God. And they would use that term God in different ways and different meaning for each. If we take Plato, for example, in investigating the source of that transcendent aspect of that, he theorized of what he called the demiurge, which would have been kind of the eternal and infinite craftsman, the creator of the universe, the unmoved mover, the uncontingent being, his concept of God. But again, from the earliest beginnings of Western thought, we see these three in particular, and that is, it stood the test of time, that distinctness of how they're reflected in creation, in the universe, in humanity. And so now in our secular age, a renewed focus on the Transcendentals can help not only to reinforce our own faith, because in them we see that clear reflection of God, but also to bring that image of God to those that are faith challenged, perhaps, for lack of a better word. Let's look at all three briefly, starting with truth. Truth is that which reflects reality. That which reflects reality. We can look at the opposite of truth. And the opposite of truth isn't just simple falsehoods like 2 + 2 = 5. It's also those things that are unintelligible, yet meaningless, like a square circle or a one-ended walking stick. And in this day and age, that's particularly important when we have people talking about fathers giving birth, for instance. That does not reflect reality. That's actually unintelligible. Now, humans are always searching for greater truth, better understanding of the universe, better understanding of the meaning of life. Now, often that gets, turned askance. For instance, if you look at scientism, but that desire, at least, is quite good. That's our desire, again, to understand reality. And ultimately, truth brings us to God. Truth ultimately is a person that became incarnate and died on a cross for us. So this natural urge that we have to seek greater and greater truth, properly ordered, properly focused, inevitably brings us to God, certainly for the early Greek philosophers. Goodness. We tend to use good as a catch-all for anything that is pleasant, that's likable, that's desirable, and to an extent that may be true enough. But the essence of goodness is for something to fulfill its purpose. Something is good to the extent that it does what it is meant to do. A chair is good to the extent that a chair is comfortable and doesn't collapse when it's sat upon. That's a good chair. For humanity, our goodness is wrapped up in our purpose. In philosophical terms, it's called our final cause, or our telos, what we are made for. What are we made for? Always back to the Baltimore Catechism. We're made to know, love, and serve God so that we can be with him for eternity in heaven. And obviously what is absolutely part and parcel with that is loving and serving our neighbor, the two great commandments. And that is our purpose. It's always outward focus. That is what is good. What's the opposite? The opposite. So if God is goodness, and that's the ultimate real definition and litmus test or yardstick for goodness is God himself, the opposite of goodness, that evil, is then Satan, right? And it's no surprise if we look at it, because we said goodness, it's that outward focus. We're meant to know, love, and serve God and our neighbor. What is Satan most associated with? Pride, that inward focus. And that outward focus, by the way, is why goodness, the transcendental of goodness, is also closely associated with justice. Sometimes it'll actually, the three will be enumerated as truth, justice, and beauty, because justice is to give to the other what is deserved. We give to God what is God deserves. We give to neighbor what is due to our neighbor. We don't figure in there. Obviously, we take care of ourselves, but the main reason we take care of ourselves is so we're available to serve God and neighbor. So we do rest, we take time for recreation, and especially we do it with great trust that God will always provide exactly what we need to take care of ourselves so that we're energized, we're refreshed, we're able to go out there and do his work. But goodness, it is to serve your purpose. Our purpose is to love and serve God and neighbor, and we do that perfectly. By the way, that's called a saint. Saints are the perfection, their perfect goodness in their human nature. And the third is beauty. That's what we were talking about last week. Beauty, that transcendental, that's greater among equals in its ability to break through to the human heart and grab hold of it. Very hard to define, though. Beauty, very hard to define. Here's 3 points from philosopher Johannes Lotz that, well, it's his characterization. It's actually, it ultimately ties back to Aquinas' characterization of beauty. But here are 3 characteristics of it: perfection of a particular form, a harmonious resonance, and a shining forth, or a luster. Okay, perfection, harmonious resonance, and shining forth. There are other terms that are offered in there too, as balance and completeness and so on. It's hard. It is hard to put it in words, isn't it? And that is the power. That's the thing about beauty. Beauty very quickly moves beyond the intellect. Truth and goodness, they're very much operative in our intellect. When we get to beauty quickly goes to the heart. It goes to emotion. It goes to affection. And that's the power of it. It goes so quickly. It rises above to that place where words don't suffice. And the opposite is true too, right? With ugliness. We know ugliness when we see it. Boy, we sure do. It sucks the life out of us, right? So too, beauty, it's life-giving when you're around that, when you're in a beautiful church, beautiful images, beautiful music, beautiful incense rising up. What does it do? It just lifts your spirit. You rise above. We aspire, we elevate, we attain to God and divine things. That is the great power of beauty. And that is the power of all 3 of the transcendentals. Just the beauty is the one that just, again, so naturally touches us at our core. But when we follow the other 2 as well, truth and goodness, all of them point upward. So it is very good for us to be aware of these things, to follow them in our own mind. Why do we seek truth? Why do we seek goodness? Where is it leading? Why do we want to know the purpose of life? Why is it fulfilling to serve other people? Why should we do that? Why should we even care about that? Why do we want to answer questions about the universe? When we follow these things to their natural conclusion, what we'll find, just as Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle found, is that it points us to our Creator. So I hope you have a wonderful week ahead with opportunities to reflect on the Transcendentals that God is putting in your path to remind you that He is always there. And I look forward to being with you again.